When Donkey Kong Country launched in 1994, it dazzled players worldwide. To understand how this jungle-themed adventure came to be, we first traveled to the desert, the setting for the tales of 1001 Nights. Aladdin for the Mega Drive was a huge hit for Sega and helped them exceed Nintendo in total market share. The game was revealed on a trade show in the summer of '93, and its fluid animations caught the attention of Nintendo's development manager, Tony Harmon. He was impressed by the game's quality and realized the urge for Nintendo to strike back. Harmon was already toying with the idea to attract more Western developers. With Nintendo's top talent in Japan already occupied, it became the opportunity to search for a development partner outside of Japan. His search ultimately led him to the UK-based studio Rare. The UK had a thriving home computer market, but Rare was the first to acknowledge the potential of Nintendo's 8-bit console back in 1985. They became their first Western developer, creating acclaimed hits like Battletoads and RC Pro-Am. But for some reason they remained along the sidelines during the 16-bit era. When Tony Harmon visited Rare in 1993, he was shown several tech demos featuring pre-rendered 3D graphics. Although they were rather simplistic, he immediately recognized the potential. After getting Nintendo of Japan's approval, all they needed now was a gaming icon to feature in their new state-of-the-art platformer. To Rare's surprise, Nintendo was open to the idea of using the iconic Donkey Kong. An even bigger surprise was the minimum amount of involvement from Nintendo during development. This was quite the opposite from the joint effort between Argonaut Software and Nintendo on Star Fox. The Japanese pixel art was considered the pinnacle of the industry, while the animations used in Aladdin were drawn by the highly respected Disney artists. To compete with them, Rare needed a secret weapon: highly advanced Silicon Graphics workstations and state-of-the-art 3D software. Silicon Graphics was already successful in a wide range of markets that relied on powerful graphical processing. However, the hefty price tag of $70,000 a system was a huge hurdle to take for most video game companies. Luckily, Rare was financially backed up by Nintendo, who actually acquired 49% of the company. With Nintendo's investments, Rare could afford several SGI systems to be used on Donkey Kong Country, as well as future titles. Alias Power Animator was Rare's software of choice, a powerful and versatile 3D package with an impressive track record. Power Animator's first use in the entertainment industry was in 1989 on the water effects in The Abyss. A couple of years later, it helped to realize the award-winning visual effects in Terminator 2. Although 3D software was already used for various bits and pieces in the video game industry, using it on a large scale was practically unheard of. And remember, even Toy Story, the world's first fully computer-animated feature, was still more than a year away from hitting theaters. But all these powerful tools and workstations aside, in the end, it's still the individual artist that makes the difference. Not only were they tasked to produce graphics unseen in the video game industry, they also had to master the complex tools in a relatively short time span. After a short period of pre-production and planning, a core development team of around 16 people started production in the winter of '93. The general process started with creating a 3D model or wireframe on the computer. The next step was to define how the surface of the model would interact with light by applying the so-called shaders. Adding textures added another layer of realism to the models. The final step involved rigging the models for animation. Rendering the 3D data to a 2D image usually took place overnight, as it demanded many hours in order to complete all the necessary calculations. The story goes that during the summer, the heat generated by all the equipment inside the office became unbearable for the team. To make all the high-quality rendered images work on the Super Nintendo, however, they had to be downscaled and reduced in number of colors. This was not a simple automated process, but required a lot of painstaking work by hand to retain the most detail. Backgrounds were an even bigger challenge. As we demonstrated in a previous episode, all graphics of 16-bit games were split up in small tiles. SNES background tiles were typically 8 or 16 pixels wide and very restricted in the number of colors. Although the game was stored on a massive 32 megabit cartridge, it was still a necessity to make tiles reusable. Traditional pixel art was made with these limitations in mind, as opposed to the 3D rendered backgrounds produced by Rare. As you can imagine, it caused a huge challenge to break these complex backgrounds down into as few tiles as possible while still retaining the 3D rendered quality. With these struggles in mind, it makes the end result all the more impressive. The visuals even managed to hold up better than most games featuring early pre-rendered graphics. Thanks to the strong and consistent art direction, all the elements blended together nicely, and the impressive atmospheric effects really brought the world to life. But as advanced as the tools were, the concept work was done using more low-tech methods. It was common in these days to write or sketch out gameplay ideas on paper first. Of course, not all ideas ended up in the final game, as this planning document reveals. Unique for Rare, however, was their tool for level layout planning, Post-its. These famous sticky little papers made it easier to make quick changes and rearrange sections without redrawing the whole level. Donkey Kong's last real outing dated back more than 10 years at that point. Rare realized that there wasn't enough material to pull from these early arcade games, so they needed to greatly expand Donkey Kong's universe. Crocodiles named Kremlins became the main antagonists, a logical choice considering crocodiles were featured in Donkey Kong Jr. Although, rumor has it that the Kremlins were actually transported over from another Rare project in development. When it came to gameplay, Super Mario was a big inspiration. For example, most Mario games don't display a life bar. The player's hit points are telegraphed directly to the player through the character's sprites. A powered-up Mario means an extra hit point. In a similar fashion, the character of Diddy Kong was a clever way to give the player an extra hit point while retaining the on-screen status information to a bare minimum. Taking inspiration from the proven Nintendo platformers grounded the gameplay in Japanese roots, but Tony Harmon's decision to develop the game by a Western company resulted in a slightly different feel overall. The tongue-in-cheek humor, for example, helped to successfully dust off the 20-year-old monkey and make him feel fresh again. The breathtaking atmospheric score was another crown achievement. The audio samples used in the game took up more than 3 megabits, nearly the size of the original Sonic cartridge. It became a real challenge to make a composition use up only 64 kilobytes of samples so they could still fit inside the Super Nintendo audio RAM. The end result of all the tireless effort by Rare was an immersive platformer in which our two Kong heroes battle King K. Rool to retrieve their stolen bananas. The game features 40 levels and countless bonus rooms to add to the replay value. In true Rare tradition, the game is quite challenging, but not as crazy as Battletoads thanks to some advice from Nintendo. The development of Donkey Kong Country was pretty much kept under wraps, so when the game was finally revealed, it took fans, retailers, and competitors by surprise. Many were under the impression that it was running on next-gen hardware. Nintendo managed to sell millions of copies to retailers by the end of the CES trade show in the summer of 1994. A couple of months later, the game was ready to be shipped and launched with a strong marketing campaign, ensuring consumers that the Super Nintendo was still relevant in an era when next-gen systems were looming on the horizon. Donkey Kong Country ended up selling 8 million copies worldwide, therefore becoming one of the biggest selling games of its generation. The fruitful partnership between Nintendo, Rare, and Silicon Graphics continued. SGI pitched their new, affordable but powerful 3D architecture to Nintendo and Sega. Sega declined, but Nintendo made it the heart of their new console named the Ultra 64 at that point. Rare continued to be an important developer for Nintendo for the coming years. Alias Power Animator also gained momentum in the video game industry. Its use ranged from the breathtaking cutscenes in Final Fantasy VII to in-game graphics for Mario Kart 64. In 1998, Power Animator was retooled into a package called Maya, and it became one of the most popular 3D tools in the film industry. And so, Donkey Kong Country became a milestone in gaming, not only with its groundbreaking graphics, but it also gave companies like Alias and Silicon Graphics enough leverage for a breakthrough in the video game industry. Thanks for watching. This was Austin from Gameplay and Talk. Please make sure to check out my channel for Let's Plays of Donkey Kong Country, Castlevania, among many other classics.